What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of What If Deku Was Minatos Reincarnation. Now, if you guys are here and you guys haven't seen part 1, link card will be up above. But for all of those who have, just know the like goal for today's video will be 750 likes. So once you guys smash that, I'll definitely be sure to drop part 3. That said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Time skip. All right, so what happens between part 1 and part 2, and how big is the time skip that I'm alluding to right now? Well, the time skip would be about 30 minutes, basically when the test would end. Now, when this all happens, Izuku would end up being the one that ends up getting first place, followed by Momo, who comes in second, Todoroki third, and Katsumi Bakugo fourth. Now, once she comes forth, he would notice something about her, that she does not like losing whatsoever. Like, she doesn't like it at all. Like, she looks very, very much so angry. And Izuku's like, sheesh, like, she's pretty mad, right? And so everybody else would kind of begin making fun of her for that temper, especially the girls. And she would turn to them and be like, hey, I'll kill ya. And from here, you know, the girls would obviously like get scared off, but Aizawa would be like, hey, calm down, girl. You know, as Izuku watches, chuckles, and looks right at her, you know, like he's looking at her, but he's not looking at her with anger or nothing bad. Like, he's looking at her with a smile, and she looks at him and notices, and she just catches Izuku staring, and she's like, what are you looking at? Is there something on my face or something? And Izuku's like, no, sorry. From here, he looks away, and then bro just straight goes home. He would get home, relax, and then realize, oh, Saijima's not here. You know, he got home waiting to tell Saijima about that strange girl, but he remembers he really can't. And so what does Izuku do? He goes outside, trains, gets stronger, and works on some sort of special jutsu called the Rasengan. Something that he's actually been working on for quite some time now, and that he has almost figured out. It's been about 3 years since he's begun working on this. But the next day at school, he would get paired up with Katsumi Bakugo for the Heroes versus Villains trials, and they would actually have to face off against Todoroki and Momo, who are both going to be guarding the bomb, and that is going to be pretty interesting. You know, we got couple versus couple, or at least future couple versus future couple, right? And the way that I see this all playing down is essentially Katsumi going over to Izuku and being like, okay, what do we do? And, you know, Izuku just being like, all right, so I think that the best course of action would be, you know, he says his idea, and she's like, that's dumb. Why don't we just go in there guns blazing? And Izuku says, I don't know if you noticed, but that one guy has an ice quirk. He'll probably freeze the building by the time that we get in it. So I think we stay out of it until the building is frozen. And Katsumi's like, yeah, whatever. As from here, Izuku's like, trust me. Like, if my plan doesn't work, we'll go guns blazing. And Katsumi, she's like, all right, fine. And, you know, immediately, you know, All Might would be like, begin, right? And from here, you know, they would both look at each other, and then they're like, okay, let's do it, right? As Izuku just looks towards the direction of Katsumi, and they just stand there. They literally just stand outside of the building. And Todoroki just has his eyes closed. He finally opens them, right? And, you know, a shadow clone of Izuku's would have ended up making it towards the direction of the bomb room. As Katsumi's like, wait, what? Weren't you just... As you know, she realizes that another Izuku ran off into the building and went upstairs, right? And she's like, but I thought you... And Izuku just says, shh. And she does, right? She stays quiet until suddenly the whole entire area would get frozen, right? And, you know, Todoroki would think to himself that he finally did it. But from here, Izuku grabs onto Katsumi, and he would proceed to wall walk as he and her make their way towards the direction of the bomb room that Todoroki's in. And Izuku would pretty much begin using a genjutsu, was very, very subtle genjutsu, right? To cast it on Todoroki to make him think that, okay, he came in through the front door. As, you know, he shoots an icicle beam right over there. And Izuku then nods at Katsumi. He would blast off at Todoroki and be like, die, right? As Izuku lunges towards Momo's direction and throws a kunai right at her, which would actually end up cutting her right on the side of the stomach. And Izuku would grab it as he appears right behind Momo, and he would say to her, give up. as Momo would pretty much just immediately surrender, feeling the kunai to her neck, as All Might would be shocked at how incredibly fast Izuku is, right? From here, Izuku just goes on to look at Todoroki, who had finally broken out of the genjutsu, and he would look towards the direction of the bomb as he pretty much covers it in ice so that they can't even touch it even if they wanted to, right? From here, Izuku was forced to jump back as Todoroki would shoot a beam of ice at him. And Izuku would actually be forced to create a fire style jutsu to try to melt the ice, right? And the ice would begin melting, of course, but still it would be a lot harder to melt ice than it is for fire and water to come at each other, because, a fire doesn't exactly melt ice that fast, you know what I mean? But it does definitely work well. And Todoroki would be shocked, like, he has a fire quirk, right? He's like, how many quirks does this guy have? Suddenly, Izuku would say, all right, let's see what happens if I do this. As from here, he shoots a wind style jutsu right at Todoroki, as he would throw a kunai while Todoroki wasn't looking, and the kunai would actually end up going towards the bomb, as Izuku from here would land behind the bomb and cast a fire style jutsu that would melt through the ice just enough for Izuku to poke his hand into it, grab the bomb, and All Might to say, we have a winner, right? He announces that they won, and from here Todoroki would be like, whatever. As from here, he gets down, and Momo and Todoroki would be announced the losers, as Katsumi would look at Izuku and bump him and be like, hey, you're all right. And, from here, Izuku's like, yeah, you're fine too, Katsumi. As she would walk off, and, she kind of has a little bit of a slight blush on her face, but Izuku wouldn't notice it. And from here, he would make his way towards the rest of his classmates. Now, it's at this moment that all of them would begin to pretty much start hyping him up as the strongest, considering that he just beat Todoroki, who they thought might have actually been the strongest, regardless of the standings of the quirk apprehension test. And from here, Invisible Girl comes up to Izuku and taps him, and Izuku's like, whoa, what was that? And she's like, sorry, it was me. And Izuku's like, oh, right, sorry, I forgot that we had somebody with such a unique quirk. And she blushes and she's like, yeah, it is unique. And Izuku's like, it's awesome, can you turn it off and on? And Invisible Girl's like, no, I'm stuck invisible. And Izuku's like, oh man, well, it's still good because at least you always get to use your quirk. And she's like, I guess. And from here, everybody just begins talking as the rest of the quirk apprehension stuff goes on. And eventually, 2 days later, Aizawa tells them, hey, get these permission slips signed, kids. You guys need them to go to the USJ. And everybody's like, we're going to the Universal Studios Japan? And then he's like, no, we're going to, unforeseen simulation joint. And you guys are about to, see what it's like to face off against natural disasters. And they're all like, cool, right? Like from here, they all go get their paper signed. And Izuku would just be thinking to himself, who signs my paper? Like, Saijima's dead. And from here, he walks over to Aizawa as he asks him what he does, because he doesn't have a father figure in his life. He was an orphan, and the person who had taken care of him since he was 7 years old, or 6 or 5, I think. No, 7, right? Yeah, 7. Would pretty much be dead now, right? So Aizawa just says, look, go talk to the principal about that. I'm really not sure. This has never happened before. And from here, Izuku's like, all right, thanks, Aizawa. As he makes his way towards Principal Nezu's office, and Nezu would be like, Izuku, what can I do for you? He's like, would you like some tea? And Izuku's like, yeah, please. And from here, Nezu goes on to pretty much talk to Izuku for a bit, right? Now, it would be at this point that Izuku would begin talking to Nezu, right? And Nezu would be like, well, that is definitely an interesting dilemma. No parent figure means that you can't really go under normal circumstances. But seeing as you're an orphan, I think that it's fair if I was to sign this, considering how powerful you are. I think you'll be fine. From here, he signs the paper for Izuku, and suddenly somebody would enter the classroom in all of their 8 feet to 7 feet glory, right? All Might busts in, and he's like, Izuku, we need to talk. As from here, Nezu would say, All Might, you finally ready to talk to the boy about your little issues, right? And Nezu would begin to hop off of his high chair, and he's like, all right, I'll give you guys the room. As from here, All Might begins to walk over towards Izuku, sit him down, and pretty much pass him something to drink. And he then tells the kid, are you working with All for One? As Izuku's like, all for who? And All Might's like, don't lie to me, kid. You know who he is. How else could you have gotten access to so many quirks? You have the ability to shoot fire out of nowhere, wind, earth. You even have the ability to walk on walls. You can teleport all over the place. What is it with you, kid? How do you have so many powers? And Izuku would be like, look, first of all, these powers are all one singular quirk. My quirk is the ability of life energy. With life energy, I can transfer that energy into different things. That very same energy can be used to stick onto things if I channel it strong enough. That same energy can fortify my body. That same energy can manifest itself as things that I call jutsus. And the way that it works is that my body has chakra paths that allow me to use those things to actually create foreign techniques such as flames, lightning, lightning, wind, earth. And All Might would be like, lightning? And Izuku's like, yeah, I actually have that ability as well. All Might would be very, very impressed with Izuku's quirk. And then he would say, so just to be straight, you have no idea who All for One is, right? And Izuku says, look, All Might, if I knew who that was, I would tell you. I loved you ever since I was a kid. But, you know, you never were my number one hero. It was always... And then he says the old name of Saijima's pro hero name. And All Might's like, what? Really? You liked him? I actually remember I saw him once or twice once I was a young up-and-coming hero, right? And, you know, Izuku's like, really, All Might? Like, that's awesome. And All Might just nods and he's like, yeah, he was great. He was great back then. And from here, Izuku's like, he was actually my father figure. He adopted me when I was about 5 years old. 5 years old? No, 7 years old, right? And from here, All Might's like, that's great, kid. He's like, sorry for stunning you and making you a little terrified. And Izuku's like, oh, no, don't worry, All Might. I wasn't scared at all. And All Might's like, what? And Izuku's like, yeah, see you later, All Might. As he walks out of the door and All Might is just left there sitting there just like, the kid wasn't even scared or nothing? Wasn't even a little intimidating? And from here, All Might's just thinking to himself, did I lose my edge, man? Like, am I getting soft or something? And, you know, Izuku just proceeds to go home where he would continue to train and from here would finally wait about a week. Finally, during this week, one thing would happen which would be kind of interesting, which would be that some strange kid with blonde hair would go over to Izuku and tap him. He's like, finally, I get to know how his quirk works, right? And Monoma realizes it's a blank slate. It's another one of those strange blank slates. I can't copy his quirk. And, you know, from here, Izuku looks to the direction of Monoma. And, you know, what's her name? Is it, you know, that girl with the orange hair? I forgot her name. Kendall, right? Kendall. She walks up and she's like, hey, Monoma. She smacks him over the head. And Izuku's like, he's like, what was that about? And she's like, oh, don't mind him. He's one of us in class 1B. You know, he's seen all about your power and we all have, and we think it's interesting. He has the ability to copy other quirks. I guess he was trying to copy yours. And Izuku's like, oh, right. He said something about blank slate. Monoma just gets up and he's like, yeah, I couldn't copy your quirk for some reason. It's interesting. I can only usually not copy some sorts of quirks. And from here, you know, Katsumi, you know, she's watching everything, you know, eating. And Izuku grabs his tray of lunch and makes his way over towards Katsumi's table, where she's actually not sitting next to anybody because of the mere fact that, you know, Kirishima doesn't have to actually think that she's cool considering she's not manly, you know what I mean? And, you know, Kaminari, you know, I feel like Kaminari would want to be all over her, but considering how scary she is, I think he would stick to Jiro. So Katsumi is just kind of sitting by herself. And Izuku goes over, sits right next to her and says, is this spot taken? Katsumi, she's like, yeah, it's not, but you can't sit there. I like eating alone. And Izuku's like, nah, nonsense. Like, I'll sit here. And from here, you know, he asks, he's like, what's your story? Why do you want to become a pro hero? And Katsumi, she says, I want to prove that I can become the number one hero, even if I'm a girl. All my life, people have said, oh, if you were a boy, you'd be so much stronger, so much better. But I don't think that's true. I think I'm fine the way that I am. And Izuku says, that's an honorable goal. My goal is becoming the number one hero for my deceased father. And Katsumi would think to herself, well, don't think for a second I'm going to let you win just because your dad died. And, you know, she finally realizes what came out of her mouth. And she's like, sorry, it's a little competitive. And Izuku just like, nah, yeah, I get it. It's totally cool. Like, I understand, you know, fiery nature. Love it. And, you know, Katsumi looks at him and she's like, really? And Izuku's like, yeah, of course. I mean, you're competitive, right? It's great to be competitive. It's great to have that fiery spirit within us, you know? It makes us who we are. And Katsumi thinks, yeah, that's right. And from here, Izuku would go on to continue talking to her for a bit until eventually, you know, other people would end up pretty much leaving and the next class would start. From here, Izuku wouldn't really speak to Katsumi for a while until eventually the day of the USJ event would actually happen and Izuku would have no other seats open except for the one near Katsumi. It's at this point that he has to pretty much start talking to her and Izuku uses his unforeseen chakra riz, you know, to pretty much riz Katsumi up a little bit, make her laugh every now and then. And when she laughs, she would kind of like stop herself as, you know, she looks around, notices other people are noticing she's laughing. And, you know, Mineta would bump Izuku on the shoulder and be like, dude, I think she likes you. That's interesting. I thought you were the demon. And from here, Izuku's like, come on, don't call her that. And Katsumi hears that. She's like, hey. And from here, you know, Mineta's like, see? And from here, you know, they walk inside as Ida just leads them all inside. And once they're in there, you know, 13 begins to give her lame speech. As, you know, she's like, you know, quirks can be really dangerous if you guys don't know how to use them properly. And, you know, everybody kind of gets what the point is of her little speech. But eventually what would end up happening is Izuku would end up making his way towards the front. And it would be here where Izuku would ask Aizawa, how many people are supposed to be in the USJ? And Aizawa's like, only us. Why? As Izuku would say, because there's, and suddenly Kurogiri would teleport in front of all of them as Bakugo would rush in, or Katsumi, sorry. She rushes in with her explosion quirk and goes right through him. Kirishima would try right next, and he would actually go right through him as well. As you know, what would actually end up happening is Kurogiri would end up being like, sorry to barge your party, heroes. But it looks like we weren't invited. As from here, you know, a bunch of villains would finally make their presence known. They come out of hiding, and, you know, Aizawa realizes, 13, get the students to safety. I'll handle this, as he jumps down and begins trying to face off against all the villains that are down there. And Katsumi and Kirishima would look at each other and then rush towards the direction of Kurogiri once more, as Kurogiri teleports a multitude of the class away, and Ida would break out of the USJ trying to alert All Might. As of this moment, Izuku would be teleported straight to the water area, where he would land and walk on the water, jump back on the boat, and watch as Tsuyu would actually save Mineta from drowning. And from here, Izuku would actually end up making a plan to get them out of there. And the plan was throw a kunai, and then from here use some sort of vortex jutsu to just cause the villains to, you know, get hit with the underwater tsunami, right? And what Izuku would do is throw a kunai straight back to land, teleport them all there, and then use a water style jutsu vortex whirlwind to pretty much just cause a gigantic vortex, what I just said, whirlwind, to happen in the water, which would suck up all the villains and have them actually collide with each other and make them all be ultimately defeated, as Mineta would throw a bunch of sticky bombs in there, right? As, you know, he's out of the water and he starts kicking it, saying, yeah, villain, do something, right? And from here, Izuku's like, not cool, dude. And Mineta's just like, sorry, got a little carried away. And from here, what would actually end up happening is Izuku would make his way towards Aizawa, where he would get back to back with him and begin using taijutsu skills to actually fight against these villains with hand-to-hand combat. And Aizawa would be extremely impressed with Izuku. I mean, when was the last time a kid used nothing but taijutsu and was actually able to defeat a multitude of villains without using their quirk? Izuku would bust that out eventually, and what he does end up using is a lightning style, which would actually cause all of the villains that were in his vicinity to get hit with this like cord, this like stream of electricity that would actually hit them and cause them to get disoriented, dazed, and all that stuff, right? And the villains would actually get caught off guard by this, because it's like they never expected this kid to actually have the hands and be able to pull out lightning and stuff like that. But once that would happen and they would take care of a large group of villains, eventually Shigaraki would begin scratching his neck and be like, it's not fair. Kurogiri, bring out the Nomu. As from here, Kurogiri would pretty much use his quarter quirk and bring a Nomu out immediately, as, you know, it would start causing havoc, right? It roars, and, you know, Shigaraki's like, Nomu, kill the brat. As you know, the zero pointer, or I'm sorry, not the zero pointer, but the Nomu itself would look at the direction of Deku and it would rush him with a powerful like war cry, like screech, right? And Izuku would just think to himself, oh, that's not good. As the Nomu would rush in and throw a punch, which Izuku would dodge by teleporting away, right? The Nomu from here would turn back around towards the direction where Izuku teleported, and it would look at him as it roars out once more, and it would then rush at him again and again and again and again. And Izuku would try to do whatever he can and try to like slash at the Nomu, right? But when Izuku would teleport behind the Nomu and try to cut it, he would realize that the Nomu would actually not get pierced. Like, its skin was so thick that, you know, Izuku's kunai was just not piercing it. And Izuku would even channel chakra through it, but it didn't get deep enough to actually hurt the Nomu. The kunai would literally pop out of its skin and just heal right back up in some sort of Venom Wolverine-esque type way, right? Where Izuku would just get completely stunned, and then he would get punched away, as Izuku would really feel it in his forearms, considering that's what he blocks with. And Izuku from here would have the Nomu screeching as it rushes back towards him, and Izuku was forced to teleport right in the midst of the very, very last instant, right? As from here, Izuku would begin to pretty much try to get as much space from the Nomu as he can and trap it in an earth style like coffin thing that the Nomu would just punch its way out of. And Aizawa would be shocked because he's actually using his like cancellation of quirk ability, right? And Aizawa was just like, that thing is just so strong. And Izuku from here, he's just like, okay, how do I handle this? You know, he's thinking to himself, what do I do, right? But from here, he would think to himself, that jutsu. If I can only land that jutsu at the top of its brain, I think that that's a weak point. If I can land it there, that might just be enough to do it. And so from here, Izuku would tell Aizawa, if you use your quirk in tandem with my ability that I've been working on, we might be able to defeat this thing. And so Aizawa says, fine, but make it quick. As from here, he activates his quirk erasure ability, and Izuku would pretty much lunge at the Nomu. As you know, they're both going in to throw a punch, and Izuku would be coming in using his sword, right? Izuku drops his sword last minute, teleports over the Nomu, catches his kunai, and then slam! A Rasengan straight to the top of the brain of the Nomu. As the Nomu would screech out in so much pain, and Izuku would stab the Rasengan, piercing it through the head of the Nomu, causing it to just explode everywhere, and Izuku would land on the ground as the Nomu would finally be defeated. And Shigaraki says, "No, Kurogiri, get us out of here."